I'm sure I join many of you in saying that was just a spectacular run through many, many decades of history. I found myself, as Nikhil was speaking, I found myself wondering what our society would be like today if instead of David Frum and Chuck Todd and all these former CIA directors and others on TV, what if we had this kind of perspective just regularly on our major media outlets, dissecting and reflecting on how we got to where we are? Don't you think this country would be different? I mean, if someone like Nikhil was regularly in the mix, I'm not saying that just one intervention here and there, they already do that a little bit. I interviewed Noam Chomsky this week, and I was fact-checking myself about something I said to him during the interview about him having been on corporate television, and he was once on CNN in 2002. Wow. for a couple of minutes. It mostly consisted of Bill Bennett yelling at him after 9/11. He was scheduled to be on NPR once, but then they canceled him. And he was on Charlie Rose's show a few times. But it's like you're talking about the leading American dissident, or certainly one of the leading American dissidents of modern times, and he's never called by these powerful media organizations. And then we wonder, like, how we keep ending up in this position where so much of the history that Nikhil lays out seems inevitable in the empire. You ended on I think as hopeful of a note as you could. I admire you for that. Normally I just throw razor blades at the audience. But I want to start from a very simple question that's probably has a lot of complex dimensions to it in the way you'll answer it, but I'll just spit it out. Why is Trump president?
Yeah, that is a very tough one. I do think that Trump becoming president is a symptom of a tremendous series of breakdowns. There's certainly the breakdown of the GOP as a party that has anything to offer, anything that's coherent. And I think there is also the way in which the Democratic Party, in its move to basically become another party of corporate interests, no longer had a real counterpoint to offer. So I think we ended up with Trump sort of by accident. There's been a lot of comparisons between Trump and Jimmy Carter, and there's a famous book talking about Jimmy Carter as the accidental president, who kind of arises out of the morass of Watergate and the scandals of the Nixon administration, and he's a one-term president, which hopefully will also be the case here. But somebody who really emerged amidst a kind of a decomposition of the political order. And I think we're living through that kind of decomposition and recomposition now. How long it will take, I think you put it really well in your opening remarks, how long this crisis will last. Crises can last for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And they certainly can engender new crises, which create new dynamics. So we can't predict the future. But I think that has that is a big part of why Trump was elected. Now, I think that one of the big debates about Trump's election has always been, was it resurgent white supremacy that elected Trump? Was it all the sort of appeals he's made to racism, or was it some kind of expression of the economic anxiety and precarity being experienced by so many Americans throughout the country, particularly in the Rust Belt, where there was those pivotal states that turned for Trump. And I've always felt that was a false way of framing the problem. White supremacy and racist appeals are an ever kind of activatable toxin within our political life, and Trump tapped into them in the way in which the GOP has been tapping into them since the late 1960s, and even Bill Clinton tapped into them in the 1990s. So it's not surprising that should be a kind of element. But I think it's also clear that in some very pivotal parts of the country, people have really been suffering. And they either stayed home and didn't vote in the numbers that they had come out to vote for Obama, and that includes a lot of African American voters, or they flipped for Trump because they rolled the dice or basically wanted to say, screw it.
Well, and you had this phenomenon of people that voted twice for Obama and then voted for Trump.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all of these kind of wild card factors throw into it, the Russian interference, the Israeli interference, the toxic kind of degraded media ecology that we live in, and this is what we wind up with. And another presidential election in which the Democratic candidate won the popular vote, but still doesn't become president because of our archaic constitutional structure, our archaic anti-democratic constitutional structure, I should add, that in some ways also stacks the deck. So there's so many different factors, but I think they all lead to this kind of conclusion that we're living in a kind of a crisis of our political order, and Trump is the embodiment of that crisis. He's not any kind of architect or maestro or sort of evil genius. He's really just a kind of the kind of disaster, a kind of collective expression of the disaster. Right?
I want to talk about resistance to Trump, but I also want to talk about the so-called hashtag resistance. The kind of Hillary Clinton wing of the Democratic Party and this merger with the so-called never Trumpers, many of whom are neocons who never met a war they didn't want someone else's children to fight, and they're now, the heroes of liberal media in this country. You had the battle between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders in the primaries, and for all of the talk about the release of the DNC emails and the phishing of John Podesta's emails, the most vivid outcome of the publication of those emails was a realization on how dirty the Clinton campaign was operating against Bernie Sanders. That was actually the biggest revelation within those. The most consistent theme was about subverting the insurgent campaign of Bernie Sanders. And of course, in the end, Bernie folded into it. He endorsed Hillary Clinton. But you definitely have now this split, even within parts of the mainstream of the Democratic Party, with people that are saying, okay, the Clinton experiment is dead. People clearly don't want, monarchies in this country. They don't want royal families like the Bushes or the Clintons. And maybe Bernie Sanders sort of represents a new wave of what the Democratic Party can be. And then you still have this very entrenched, powerful elite of the Democratic Party that the Clintons are certainly a product of and helped to build. But you also have the portrayal of Bernie Sanders and his supporters as like Bernie bros, that it's misogyny, it was actually her turn, and that Bernie Sanders, actually ruined it for Hillary. You have that. Then you have the increasing popularity, particularly among young people, of the Democratic Socialists of America. You have victories like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in New York, where she almost certainly is going to represent a big chunk of Queens and the Bronx in Congress. You have other candidates that are running. In Texas, you have Beto O'Rourke challenging Ted Cruz and echoing a lot of that. But as Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor said recently, throughout history, when insurgents have run as part of the Democratic Party apparatus, but from the left, more often than not, they get folded into the Democratic Party rather than actually changing it. How do you see both the kind of institutional state of the Democratic Party right now, but also this kind of bubbling, non-central Democratic Party movement that is increasingly engaging in an inside-outside strategy, running for office, but also continuing protest direct action?
I mean, I think you've described the landscape really well. It's obviously very fluid, and I think I'm always a bit wary of predicting what's going to happen, especially in an environment like this.
That's why you don't go on MSNBC.
Perhaps.
You have to know everything always.
Right. I guess that's right. The thing is, I do think we have to win the battle for the Democratic Party. I mean, I think that's, I know what certainly what Kianga's saying about, the inevitable getting folded into the structure. But the Democratic Party can be fought over. There was a moment in the history of the Democratic Party in the 1970s and in the 1980s where there were big battles going on for the future of the Democratic
Even
Party.
before that, Fannie Lou Hamer and you
certainly going way back, right? But I did a lot of work with one of the great African American freedom fighters, Jack Odell, who worked with Jesse Jackson and worked on the Rainbow campaigns. And Jack's 95 now. He lives in Vancouver. He tells a story about the day that Jesse lost in 1988, and Ron Brown came to him on behalf of the Clinton administration and said, "We'll give Jesse a seat at the table if he hands over all the lists of the Rainbow Coalition." And that day, the Rainbow Coalition ceased to exist, right? It ceased to exist as a force in American politics. You're talking about millions of people, including people in Wisconsin and other states, who cast their vote for Jesse Jackson and for a real social democratic multicultural vision of the future of the society. And the corporate Democrats took the party over lock, stock, and barrel. And that's what's being contested now. That's what's under pressure. And I think we have to continue to fight that battle. And I think fighting it as an inside-outside battle is the only way to fight it. I don't mean inside-outside in the sense of third parties, but inside-outside in the sense of the continued momentum that comes from creating centers of authority in the country outside of the party structure. What was the civil rights movement if not an alternative center of social authority to the existing party structure? The labor movement at different times has played that role. The women's movement has played that role at different times. And the environmental movement can and should be playing that role in this moment. There's no need to have any shortage of movements. That's what I meant it very seriously. Bring on the excess of democracy. But we have to obviously work pragmatically through some of the vehicles we have. So I do think it's a crucial fight of now. I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't have a lot of optimism about the Democratic Party currently. I mean, when Chuck Schumer is leading your battle in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, who of course voted against the Iran deal, who did everything to scuttle it during the Obama administration, who's always been an inside player of corporate lobbyists. You had 97% of the Congress voting for the last defense budget or the Senate. Mm-hmm. I don't even know the numbers. You know them better
85%.
than I do. Okay, 85%. So maybe that's a better number.
No, it's
it's terrible.
85% of Democrats in the Senate voted to give Trump the largest military defense authorization in history, $718 billion.
Right.
And they also voted to give him the most extensive surveillance powers in the history of this country. But they say, oh, this man is owned by Vladimir Putin. He's a grand threat. Wait, Trump wants the most sweeping surveillance powers? Oh, okay, yeah, we need that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's the grand contradiction of these jackasses. I mean, it's like they're
is.
Constantly saying, oh, he's going to ruin the republic, and then they give him everything.
And they give him everything. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that's my best shot at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure, many people here, we all struggle with this on a regular basis. I mean, I referenced earlier, we know Hillary Clinton wouldn't have put Brett Kavanaugh in as a Supreme Court justice, but she may be bombing North Korea right now, and it's so it's like that. We're sort of forced into this situation because of how the political system has been rigged in this country, where you're constantly forced into this thing of, well, I guess I'm going to have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I mean, yes, there are truly Hillary cultists, but I think a lot of people were sort of like, my God, I don't want Donald Trump. I mean, and it's like, I'm not a big fan of the Clintons. Yeah, I know her problems, but I don't want that guy as president. And it's like, that's how the Democratic Party has sort of been thriving for a while.
I mean, the bottom line
We're not them.
We are not in a time of incremental change. We are not in a time where incremental change will do. And I think that this is the thing that the Obama administration, and I didn't talk much about Obama. I was certainly an early enthusiast for Obama. I think Obama is, the most, probably one of the best presidents we've seen in my lifetime. And that is said from the standpoint of everything I said before to you, which is that, the bar is very low. I think Obama was basically like an Eisenhower Republican, and he had a sort of a cautious institutional streak, and he followed the line. He followed the line on the sort of corporate reconstruction of depleted capitalism at the end of the financial crisis, at the expense of American homeowners, at the expense of American workers, at the expense of continued stagnant wages. He did one really smart thing, where he basically said, the government actually can do some good things. It might actually be able to extend some of its capacity to make sure that everybody has health insurance. And now we have a target that we can build from, right? So now people are actually talking about universal health insurance. Okay? Now that partly is part of the dynamic of the opposition to Obamacare and so forth, but I think Obama was actually somewhat clever in some of those maneuvers. But ultimately, he was another imperial manager who did very little to stem the tide of economic inequality, ecological degradation, and the continued bloat of the empire. So there's reform around the edges, but very little to change the underlying conditions that had produced the crisis in the first place and that most people are still living with. So when you see someone like Hillary Clinton come along, who's not even as progressive as Obama, and who's arguably going to be even worse, promising just a little bit more of the same, I can see why people would be, less than enthused.
Well, and I now in retrospect, I sort of think of Obama as like the guy in the mafia movies when like somebody gets bumped off in a really messy way, and then they have to send in the person to go clean up the mess. He's that for imperialism and for empire.
Yeah.
He comes into office. And one of the first things he does is say, I'm going to end the torture, I'm going to end all of this stuff, but I won't hold anyone accountable for it.
Yeah.
He then says, I've figured out a new, smarter way to wage wars. Instead of doing big-scale ground invasions, we're going to start drone bombing countries, and I'm going to give carte blanche to the CIA paramilitaries and the Joint Special Operations Command. And then you fast forward to very recently, the John McCain funeral was like, the secular massive empire. Where George Bush literally passed the candy of the Eucharist over to, Michelle Obama in this amazing moment where the kind little painter man now is friends with. He killed a million people, but my God, that candy pass was so heartwarming.
I think you just stole my thunder. Everyone's going to remember the secular massive empire.
I'm sorry.
No, I'm kidding. That's a great line. It's true. It's true.
But see, this is the problem, and I think it's also why a lot of people who have spent their lives doing anti-war organizing, immigrant rights organizing, the idea when they hear people say, well, we have to fight for the Democratic Party, I also think a lot of third-party people in this country have just been completely maligned and attacked. With no real justification. Ralph Nader did not cause George Bush to be president. Jill Stein did not cause Hillary Clinton to lose. I have my own critiques of the Green Party, but my God, they have every right. In fact, they are right to organize it. Nothing will change fundamentally in this country until the corporate duopoly is broken. We all know that. The question is, and I think it's a really fascinating one, do we fight to try to take that party over because there's already the infrastructure there, or do we fight to shatter it?
Well, those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive options.
Well, go ahead, take the stage.
I mean, the end of slavery marked the shattering and reconstruction of one of the parties, right? The Whig Party no longer existed anymore, right? So the party duopoly, maybe it's hardwired. We don't have a parliamentary system. We have a winner-take-all system. So it's very difficult to be a third party and not operate as a spoiler. And I agree with you 100%. I never condemned anybody for organizing for Jill Stein. And to go back to Ralph Nader, I mean, Nader was really the great hero coming out of the 60s in terms of consumer advocacy. He's another person, by the way, who Lewis Powell is really, really upset about in his memo, right?
Was Mr. Rogers also on that list?
Dangerous man, right?
What does that train really mean? Trolley.
So I'm not a tactician, but I just tend to think that we do have to, in some ways, smash and recompose the Democratic Party. That is part of the struggle,
I was saying to Nikhil earlier, and it's something I actually think about a lot, and I know it wouldn't have happened, but I believe that we had this moment in time when it was clear that there were a lot of dirty tricks that the Clinton campaign played against Bernie Sanders. He could have argued that it was an illegitimate process. Even Donna Brazile, in flashes of honesty, has indicated that there was rigging involved in the process of coronating Hillary Clinton as the Democratic nominee. Bernie Sanders, had he said, you know what, I'm going to run as a third-party candidate, I'm going to challenge you, obviously he would have been blamed for Trump being president. He already is blamed by the Hillary Clinton camp for Trump being president. But that I believe, and tell me if you disagree with me, I think that was the most important moment we had in the history of the modern two-party system where it could have been called into serious question. Because if Sanders had run from the left, it would have broken the Democratic Party into a million little pieces. But what would have emerged out of it, I think, would have been probably 4 parties in this country. And I don't blame Bernie Sanders for not doing it. It would have taken incredible, he would have, you think Ralph Nader has it bad. Bernie Sanders would have been like pounded with the pink hats, into his grave. But nothing will change fundamentally until that system is shattered. So it's like, these are the things a nerd like me dreams about. Like, what if Bernie Sanders had done that? What would it have done? Because the Republican Party kind of got shattered a little bit by the Tea Party and is in firm control of the most right-wing elements of that party right now.
Well, we could spin out so many counterfactuals all day. And we once had a conversation about, whether World War II really needed to happen in the way that it happened.
Oh, that was on my list here.
So we could. Jeremy loves a good counterfactual, and I do too.
I tried to make Nikhil come up on the spot with how would racist, murderous settlers in the United States have described their conquests of Indian territory.
Yes,
we had to edit it because he couldn't come up with a good one.
I couldn't come up with a good
anyway,
one.
Go ahead. Sorry.
But I've always thought one of the greatest failings of the Obama administration was it had no real political vision. It didn't actually think about the course of American politics. Or if it did, it was really about the idea that you could do incremental, cautious things and kind of preserve the institutional structure, a complete misreading of the moment, of the historical moment we're in every sense, really. And one of the worst things he did was to keep the Clintons around. Because giving Hillary Clinton the continued place in the administration to kind of parade around the world and to do her thing was basically about the anointing of the Clintons to continue that. And if Bernie hadn't run, what would we have seen? It really would have been a coronation. And the fact that Bernie exposed the weakness of the institutional Democratic Party was a huge service to all of us. What would have happened had he actually done what you said? I can't really say. Yeah. I would say, though, that we shouldn't just focus on the Democratic Party because Donald Trump has also broken the GOP. And the GOP it's not clear that the GOP is going to be able to survive as the party that it is right now. It may end up actually being the party that breaks and recomposes. We don't really know. Because at some point, and I truly do believe this is going to happen, they are going to abandon Trump. There's going to be a moment where it's kind of like, we can't keep doing this. This is not working. They're like living in this mortuary box that he has created for them. And I really think that it is kind of like that. When you're basically up there at this particular moment having to defend an accused rapist for a seat on the Supreme Court, they can't win this. If they confirm him, there's going to be a whole new level of organized anger for the next decade that is going to continue to bubble up.
I hope you're
right. And if they punt it, it's going to be a huge psychic blow, and we don't know what's going to happen because then Trump's really not delivering what he's there to do. He's there to give them the judiciary, and he was there to give them tax cuts. Okay? He's given them the tax cuts. He's given them a lot of things on the judiciary. But once he can't do those things anymore, what is the Republican Party even for? What is it supposed to be doing? So I think there's a crisis on both sides of the political aisle right now.
Well, and the journalist Alan Nairn describes the Trump moment as, Trump defeated the most powerful political machine in modern American history, the Clintons, and he simultaneously defeated 16 Republicans and then dragged all of these radical right-wing Christian supremacists and oligarchs back into power.
Yeah.
And Mike Pence, I view part of what's happened with Trump as he has been a Trojan horse for Mike Pence. I think that Pence actually is an incredibly powerful vice president like Cheney. He's probably the most powerful Christian supremacist in modern American history. Easily could become president if the shit can hit the fan with Trump any moment, or the guy could just croak from eating too much KFC. I mean, Mike Pence could be our president, and I wonder what that would mean. But on that level, it's very easy and convenient for all of us to go after Trump because it's so obvious. The guy will lie about what time it is. He'll lie about what he's wearing as he stands before you. But he also engages in the big lies, big lies that the Democrats and Republicans alike tell every day, the lies that our big military budget is what keeps us safe, the lie that nuclear weapons is what won World War II, the lie that the free market is going to save us, that economics actually does function as a trickle down if the rich get richer than everyone else is brought up. Those are not Trump's lies, yet they're portrayed that way. My favorite recent example, Trump recently at the United Nations General Assembly, we all saw he got laughed at, but he's railing against the International Criminal Court. And it comes off of a couple of weeks ago, John Bolton, his national security advisor, gave this blistering attack on the International Criminal Court. And all these Democrats were saying, oh, look at Trump, he's saying he's against the International Criminal Court, he's against international law. In 2002, there was a law passed when the Democrats were in control of the Senate. Joe Biden was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. That is known throughout the world as the Hague Invasion Act, this is still the law of the land in the United States. And it says that if any U.S. personnel are taken to The Hague in an attempt to prosecute them for war crimes, the U.S. can militarily intervene to liberate them, invading a NATO country, the Netherlands, to do it. Jesse Helms was the sponsor of that bill. Guess who voted for it? Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Dianne Feinstein. I can go on and on and on.
Yep.
This is the thing that drives me most nuts, Nikhil, in this moment, is that so much of what Trump is doing, he's doing with the quiet applause of the Democratic elite. And I think it's a mistake to be all in on the idea that Trump's an anathema.
100% agree with you.
He's a product of their system.
Absolutely, and I think that's where we started this conversation. Really, we live with a rotten party duopoly. Both parties rotten. We live with people struggling to figure out political alternatives. We live in an ecology that is approaching a ruinous state, and an economy that is truly, deeply, profoundly precarious for most people, especially people thinking about getting old, like me.
Your 401k's not blowing up?
It'll probably blow up with the next
exactly
bubble
right.
burst. It'll totally be destroyed, right? So we're all living on the edge of something, right? So this is why I say we fight within whatever channels we can fight in. I fight in the university and try to make the university I'm in more just, more equal, more accessible to people who have been shut out of it. We fight in the different places we are. We fight in our communities and to create these alternative centers of authority. And then we fight through these institutional channels. And there's been these exciting moments like Alexandria's campaign, who we're kind of clinging to, and hopefully there will be many more. But I think it would be wrong, obviously, to be Pollyannish about any of this, and I wanted to end on an optimistic note, but you note the arc of the talk was really about the fact that we've been dealing with this for 2 centuries in some ways, still holding the wolf by the ear, not able to let go, not really able to hold on. It is the crisis of living in an empire state that does not know itself as such. And we need to end the empire, which seems to be the one thing that we can't do, right? We really need to bring the empire to an end. And we need to think about what that would then look like to live in a country that is diverse and as rich in so many ways as the United States, with the possibility of a small d democratic tradition, of people being able to live and realize their dreams as collectivities, with a government that is accountable to us. That seems to be something that we still have a lot of belief in as a preeminent value. And I think that preeminent value can guide us in the next stage. I don't think we can afford to be obviously foolishly optimistic, but I'm really worried sometimes about the kind of pessimism that I see gripping people around me, the kind of defeatism that I see gripping people around me, because what do we have to lose in the end, right? I mean, all we have is a country to fight for, right? That's what we have.
Well, Nikhil Pal Singh is, I think he's energized us. He's given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much to all the workers here who have made this night possible, have done the sound, the lights, and everything. Thank you to the Lanham Foundation. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to Nikhil Pal Singh. Make sure to get his books. They're really incredible. And thank you guys all for having us back in Santa Fe. Have a good night.